Alright chaps, how are we doing? Personally, I ache. I've refereed 3 rugby games in 2 days, and including back-to-back kids games this morning. I'm too old for this shit. Okay. This shit, however, never gets old. So this is going to be another boss mode video, and this time, instead of the King's Gambit as white, we're now looking at my sexy new little black number that I'm putting together. My black defense with e4, e5. Okay, I've made a couple of videos on this recently, and we're looking at basically, this is by far the most common response, and then we're going to play c6, knight c6. So, leads into a bunch of different directions. So we've, just to repeat, we've got the Italian or the Spanish, in which case we play f5, right? And both of these are very, very handy responses up until you get to the advanced level, way above 2000. So we don't need to worry about that. We can have fun along the way and learn more serious openings later. And then we've also been looking at the Scotch. And later on, we're going to look at the Ponziani and maybe some other sidelines. But we're putting together a little sexy black number to play as black. And this is for people who like it spicy, who like it kinky. Right? This is my kinky repertoire. So if you are the kind of person that enjoys playing the Danish Gambit or the King's Gambit or the Vienna Gambit as white, then this is for you. Right? If not, jog on. You're fine. You crack on. Play the King's Indian Defence or whatever. Anyway, so this is another boss level game video. So I've gone through the Masters database. I've put in the following opening, which is the Steinitz response to the Scotch. Okay? So I'll just remind you of the first few moves. So we've got e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and the Scotch game is typified by move 3 and d4. Immediately contesting the centre, we're attacking this twice. It's defended only once, and very, very often, most often by far, you will find pawn takes d4. Knight takes d4 is possible, but you surely just lose material that way, eh? Knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes. It's not so good. So here, pawn takes pawn, much better. And then after knight takes d4, we play, as black, because we're kinky, we play queen h4. And as someone has commented, this is one of the rare occasions when throwing your queen out into the board seems to make sense. And check it out, guys, because we're going to look at maybe half a dozen games here, all of which are on the Masters database. Okay. Now in this one, Lars Visler Pedersen is a lowly 1856. His opponent, Benjamin Douth, 2300. Okay, so let's just go through. So sit back, relax. And what we're doing is we're saying we want to get a feel for these openings. Right, now, there are, as we will see, a few common responses from strong white players to this opening. So, knight c3 kind of makes sense, right? You're defending this pawn. The problem here, of course, is that black is attacking the pawn on e4. g6 just isn't an option to kick the queen away because we take with check and then we win the rook, right? So that's not an option. So something must be done. One of the most obvious ones is knight c3. Protect the pawn and develop a piece at the same time. What's not to like? Well, one thing that's not to like, obviously, is that that knight is immediately pinnable. So knight c3. Black obviously pins the knight. So now, this knight is in what's known as an absolute pin. The king is behind it. The knight cannot legally move. So the knight now is no longer defending the pawn on e4. That's a problem. So now, we have bishop to e2 in this game, which doesn't feel quite right. Because now, for example, we can take, and then queen can take on e4, and we literally win a pawn. We're also threatening there. In the game, black plays knight e7. And now this knight comes in. This is very, very common. We'll see this all the time, guys, with the knight bouncing down here after. So it's gone 1, 2. This is move number 3 for this knight, and it's looking at the c7 fork. However, certainly in the games I've pulled up, it rarely works out well for white. And I have to say that the games we're looking at here are games where I've filtered it for black wins within 20 moves. Okay, so this is not a representative sample. If you really want to know an opening, you should look at a bunch of games where your favoured opening wins and loses, because you need to know, what are the common pitfalls as well. But here, for entertainment purposes only, we're looking at this. So, interesting move here. So after the bishop comes out to pin this knight, so this knight's still pinned, bishop drops back here where it's also defending this pawn, which is a nice, neat little move. White castles here. Black plays a6 to kick the knight away. The knight ignores the threat. Now, you always have to be kind of careful when you're doing a counter-attack. So here what white's doing is white's saying, okay, I see you are attacking my knight. I'm going to attack your queen right back so that your queen is forced to move away, and then I can retreat my knight quite safely. You just got to be slightly careful. Here the queen comes back to f6. And interesting little move from white. Still ignores the fact that this knight here is threatened and decides to press forward and attack the queen. We have a trade of knights, and now we've got a situation where we've got one knight each that's under attack. Black takes white's knight, white takes black's knight, D takes c6. And this is a theme. We see this a lot. D taking, we are opening up the center of the board. Now, at this point in time, black is up 1 pawn. So white plays the bishop out here, maybe threatening the rook to come to e1 with check, but that's quite easily blocked. And black actually prompts it. We don't have rook e1. Curious little move. We have queen e2 check. So, what does black do? Just sidesteps calmly. King f8, sidestep the threat. And now the rook is under threat. Oh, in fact, but the king can't go to here, because look, it's always under attack by this. So what are we going to see? Rook to d1? Rook d1 is played. And now, h5. Now, question time. Is black crazy? What is black doing? Why did black play h5? Take some time to think about it. Pause if you need to. White misses the threat here and plays pawn to c3. Black then plays the follow-up move, which is the whole point of pushing the pawn to h5. Bishop g4 with the skewer on queen and rook behind it. This pawn push is no good because bishop simply takes, defended by the queen, and we have the same problem. So queen now moves to one side, and black doesn't even grab the free rook, which is really just an exchange. Black pushes the pawn forward. Bishop now retreats, blocking passage to the rook. Black ignores it. Black is thinking of higher things and is actually offering up the bishop here. White doesn't take the bishop but takes the pawn instead, because obviously the threat here is that the pawn could take on f2 or h2 with check. There's still a bishop kind of lurking. This bishop's potentially evil, but actually this, hang on, this threat forces the king into the corner, and that's mate in 2. Okay, so it's not, pawn takes isn't even the threat, right? It's queen takes f2 is the threat. So something must be done, takes, and now the bishop drops back. This bishop suddenly become super evil, right? And you can see now from black's perspective why black just ignored the rook and ignored the threat on the bishop, right? And this is all about really understanding the levels of threat that you've got. Here, queen f2 looks very tempting because it threatens mate in 1. Bishop can't take because queen would take queen. So what do we have? We have queen f2. Cool. And pawn pushes forwards. Queen takes on g3. Bishop comes down here, and it's is that actually checkmate? Looks like checkmate to me. Yeah. So we get a feel for the game, right? I like it. I like it a lot. You know, as black, I don't know if there is any opening that I've seen that's this kind of spicy. But again, you know, we are looking at the spicy subset. Okay, so normal opening, the Scotch takes, knight takes, queen h4. Okay. Knight takes knight. Now, the issue here is that we give up this pawn with check. Okay. Now, the queen is also forking the knight. But as we will see, black almost never captures with the queen here. Why? Well, because, I mean, here, for example, we've got a pin on the bishop. To capture with the queen would just be to break the pin. We've also got a free pawn here, attacking this rook. Okay. But here, d takes c6. Remember this, it's a common theme. White castles. Bishop comes out now to e6. Got ideas of if we can castle, it would be through check right now. But even, you know, rook d8 is an idea. Knight now comes out to threaten the queen. Queen just drops back. Pawn to g3 is played. Queen just drops back again. Now here, if white trades queens, then he's actually repairing black's pawn structure. And he's got very little to show for his trouble, really, because white still is actually down a pawn. Bishop blocks, stands in the way of the two queens. Knight develops, queen comes out, castles. Black. So white starts to go, bishop attacks the queen. And the queen again just drops back. And this looks like black is kind of retreating down the board, but wait. Bishop goes back up, and now everything starts to fly out and start pointing at white's king. White here is rated 2100, black's 2350. Okay, pawn comes up, bishop steps forward, now pinning the knight on the rook. Rook moves, bishop comes here, now attacking the queen. And suddenly the net is now closing around white. Queen retreats, rook h to e8, hits the queen again. Queen goes to the only safe square, which is c1. And now suddenly, this queen is looking useless. Can't go here, can't go here. And these two squares are rubbish. So the queen has suddenly been shut out of the game, and suddenly black has all the initiative. So, bishop f3 now. So it didn't go to h3 and hit this rook, but went here. Now the threat is obviously for the queen to come in and mate in two. So what happens? We have rook here. This is interesting. Now there's a threat of bishop takes on here. You can see all the threats start to fly in now. It's really weird. Rook moves, obviously now in the way of the bishop and the knight. So what would you do as black? We have bishop takes, pawn takes. Knight retreats, also again opening up this path for the queen and hitting this bishop. And that's actually the last move of the game. I'm guessing that white resigns at this point. All good fun. And again, this is a slightly different move order. Here we have knight c6 first, then e5, then knight out, but it's still a Scotch. And takes, and queen h4. Our starting position, what do we see now? Knight c3. We've seen this before. So previously we saw bishop b4. Bishop b4 again pins the knight. Knight takes. Okay. Now we've got some options. In fact, queen takes e4 is playable here because the knight is in an absolute pin, can't defend. Queen takes e4. You don't have to recapture the knight straight away. Bishop blocks. Now do we take the knight? Do we take it with the d pawn? Nope. Here we double white's pawns instead. Okay, bishop takes, and now we take the knight with the d pawn. So you can see there's two nice in between moves there, right? If you go back, many of us here would be, in fact, from here, many of us would simply capture the knight, right? And if you follow the rule, capture towards the center, you're capturing with the b pawn, but giving yourself 3 pawn islands. It's not what black does. Black is rated 2200. Black first throws in a check, knowing it's safe to do so. Bishop blocks. Then we capture the knight and give white the 3 pawn islands and double his pawns and isolate the pawns. And then we take the knight. Now, white castles. Queen drops back here. We've seen this before. Saying to white, come on then, trade queens and improve my pawns, undoubling my pawns. You've still got doubled pawns. White obviously ignores and declines the invitation. Instead brings out the bishop looking at c7. Black again ignores the threat and chooses to develop instead. Okay, we have bishop attacks queen and we trade off queens. Now the bishop comes out, still ignoring this. Rook comes down here to look at this pawn. Now there's also a hanging pawn here, but we ignore that, right? Black has got one thing on his mind, which is to move forwards and attack. Okay, we have rook slides over, kind of looking at the bishop, but not really. Rook e8 is played, pawn moves forward, and now bishop here again, looking at this, trying to trade off, but white's having none of it, and now we have rook up to here, attacking the pawn, fork on the pawn and the bishop. Interesting move here. This is a nice move by white, right? X-ray defending the bishop, and if black wants to trade, lo and behold, he's repaired white's pawns. So what does black do here? Interposes the bishop. Now, this is a very interesting position. So it looks like white can take here, and if black recaptures, white's just won a piece. Obviously this bishop can't take now because that's actually mate. So this bishop's technically pinned. So what happens? Yeah, white takes with the rook. Black takes the bishop, but look, white can't recapture. Because if white recaptures, black plays rook d1 check, and the only legal move is to block with the rook, and then it's mate in two. So fascinating. So this is actually a very interesting calculation. Takes, takes, and we've just traded bishops. Rook now comes across, defending the c2 pawn. Takes the c2 pawn anyway, because he knows that white can't capture, because he gets mated. And here, white resigns 2 pawns down. Okay, we'll look at a couple more quickly. Right? Normal, queen comes out. Now, queen d3. And here, if the queen comes out, we see this. Right? So now the knight is basically pinned, because if the knight moves, queen can capture on f2 with check, forcing the king to d1. So pawn defends, knight comes out, knight comes out, knight comes in, and now we don't even need the bishop because now the knight's also looking at f2, so there is another threat here of queen takes f2. Pawn pushes up, queen slides back. This is a very typical wayward queen triangulation. Comes back here, again renewing her attentions to f2, so the pawn pushes forwards. Now, white's position is starting to show holes now. White is now being forced to make moves that he doesn't want to make. So we trade off in the middle of the board. Obviously pawn takes. Queen can't take because we've got 3 attackers on there. And if you look here, actually after this move, we have got 3 attackers and only 2 defenders on here. So he goes ahead and takes and recaptures. Now, we're going to save the knight. No, we are not. Counter-attack. Very much front foot chess we're seeing. Queen moves. Knight comes in now to a square where it can be taken by the queen, but can it? Can it? Or is it a trap? Because if queen takes now, we've got knight c2 with a 3-way family fork on king, queen and rook. So you really cannot afford to do that. So instead the bishop comes out. And now what would you play as black? You've actually got 2 knights looking at this square as well. Queen takes pawn, and again, queen can't take here because it's the same issue. Either knight can jump to there with a fork on king and queen. Royal fork. Not going to happen. And again, white resigns. Okay. Let's do one more. Again, slightly different move order, but it's still a Scotch. Queen comes out. Knight c3. Now, in the past, we've seen this. right? And really just going through these master level games, it does give you a feel for what moves to expect. It's a really good way to drill. Again, we see the same move from a 2300. Queen comes out to d3, knight comes out, forward foot chess. Yeah, knight again comes around here looking at c7. Are we concerned? No, we're not. We take. This knight is actually pinned, so it can't defend this square. Only the queen can take, and queen can't capture here. So knight comes in, and we see this quite a lot. Allowing this knight to come in, we just move the king, allow the knight to take the rook. Because look at this, boom, 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 boom. All these pieces out on the board. And the rook comes to join the party. Rook to e8. Bishop blocks. We've got two attackers on here. The pawn, I don't know. Do we take here? No, we take there. And king can't take. And we're threatening to capture the queen or the rook with a discovered check. Ouch. Okay. Now, knight takes queen is surely a double check. But we don't play that. We just grab the bishop. Curious. And here, king could take knight. King takes knight. Bishop comes back with an attack. Knight comes flying in. Knight forks. Two, doesn't matter. Takes. Oh, this is all exciting stuff. And now, the queen must defend this. Right? And this is a lovely little move from black, trying to deflect the queen away. The queen could capture the bishop, but if the queen captures the bishop, we have queen takes f3 check. The king can only go there, and then queen to there is mate. So the queen can't capture. Has to block. Renew the threat. Same problem. And white here resigns. Okay. One for the road, guys. Let's see what we've learnt so far. Okay. Queen out. And when queen out, I think we've seen this most of the time, haven't we not? No, well, here's a novelty. Okay, knight f6. Knight comes out. Knight comes in again. This ravaging knight, we've seen this before. We are really threatening this now. Pawn blocks. Queen slides back to f6. We've seen that before. All good. Now the bishop comes flying out. Bishop fianchetto. Bishop takes now. Wow. This is against the 2200. This is two 2200s. Bishop takes the pawn with check. King has to move. Bishop retreats. Queen comes down now. Knight comes in. Attacked by queen and knight, but also defended twice. And here, I think we have a resignation. And I think when I look this up, this is actually something like +8 for black, even though he's only up one pawn. So crazy, crazy stuff. So if you like what you see, then you may wish to be checking out the Steinitz response to the Scotch. I like it. I'm going to play it. And I really do feel like in just 20 minutes or so, you can play through some of these master level games and really start to get a proper feel for it. And I like what I see. So there you go. I'm happy. Hope you're happy too. I'll see you soon.